Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I know that some of you probably didn't go very far because retired Navy Commander Bobby Jones was giving us an update on the latest out of Iran. And we will probably pick right back up where he left off. I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor of Lincoln Square. And joining me today is Congressman Jason Crow. And we didn't plan this, but uh, in addition to representing Colorado's 6th district, the congressman is also a former Army Ranger who completed 3 tours of duty in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he is the perfect person to talk to right now. He is an expert in national security measures. Also, you were an impeachment manager, I believe, at President Trump's first impeachment trial. So thank you so much for being here. Welcome, Congressman.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, look forward to the discussion. And do you know how we know that we didn't plan this? Is because Congress wasn't notified and had nothing to do with the decision to attack Iran, which I'm sure we will have plenty of time to talk about, but a pretty dangerous precedent situation President Trump has led us into here.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and start there. So, in your assessment, did he violate the War Powers Act by not notifying Congress?
Yeah, based on what I know right now, absolutely he did, right? The president, under Article 2 of the Constitution, has self-defense authority, right? Every president does. Every president, as the commander-in-chief, has the ability to defend U.S. troops, U.S. persons, to defend the United States in the case of imminent risk. If there's an imminent risk, the president can, without congressional authority, take action in self-defense. But absent that, you have to go to Congress. You have to get an authorization for use of military force, and you have to have an open, transparent debate with the American people, right? And the framers of the Constitution thought this was important because they didn't want too much power concentrated into one person for the most consequential decision that any elected official can make, and that is to send our young men and women into battle, into war.
Right. And now we're getting breaking news even this afternoon. So on Saturday, the United States bombed Iran. The goal was to take out nuclear facilities in what was supposed to be a limited operation. We've been getting reports that may not have been as successful as perhaps the president claimed. We've also had Trump it sort of endorsed the idea of regime change now, which has been an unstated goal of the Israeli Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu. And just this afternoon, Iran launched counter strikes against U.S. bases in Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait. So that's the state of play. Do you see that we have a clear end game here? And let's talk about some of the geopolitical consequences of all this.
Well, clearly there's no strategy or end game, right? If there was a strategy or an end game or even a short-term plan, you wouldn't see what you're seeing right now with this administration, where people are putting out different tweets, they're putting out different statements. Donald Trump is saying things opposite what Pete Hegseth is saying, what Tulsi Gabbard, as Director of National Intelligence, is saying. They are all over the board, which certainly is not the sign of an administration that knows what it's doing and has a plan and has a strategy here. So they don't. And certainly Congress hasn't been involved in this process, as I already noted. But listen, I take all of this extremely personally, right? I was sent to war based on distorted intelligence and lies when I was a younger man. Right, I went to war 3 times in Iraq and Afghanistan. I led a platoon of paratroopers in the invasion of Iraq. Right, Americans gave their lives. And then America spent 20 years, $3 trillion, thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of Americans wounded, fighting this war in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places that by most measures ended very poorly.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So when you have now another president saying, oh, there's intelligence that shows weapons of mass destruction and we're going to do a preemptive strike and pull Americans into this, I get a little bit pissed off, right? Because it's not Donald Trump and it's not the elites in Washington making these decisions, pounding their chest, saber rattling from their air-conditioned Washington offices that are going to have to pick up rifles or get into planes and do the hard work, it's everybody else. It's the people that I grew up with. It's the people that I served with that are going to have to do the hard work and put their lives on the line. So, yeah, call me skeptical, but I really am.
And you've spent a lot of time in the Middle East, serving our country. And of course, Iran is a far bigger country than Iraq or Afghanistan are. Um, uh, Tell us what we need to know about the situation on the ground there and about what the impact could be on our allies and also, our geopolitical foes like China that's now involved. Or,
Yeah.
we have the president, we have Marco Rubio saying, please come save us so the Strait of Hormuz is not closed.
Well, I'm just reminded whenever we talk about conflict and war in the Middle East, I'm just reminded of that scene in The Godfather where Michael Corleone's in the kitchen and he's been trying to get out of organized crime. And he says, just when you think you get out, they pull you back in, right? That's the Middle East for us. Like, why?
Right.
Why are we constantly fighting and have 40,000 troops and spending tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars getting involved in these conflicts? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all about defending America. I am a national security Democrat, and there are times to be strong. There's times to be resolute. I'm a firm supporter of Ukraine. I believe we need to be tough on China. There's no doubt about that. But the amount of time and energy and resources that America spends getting pulled into quagmire after quagmire in the Middle East should piss every American off, right?
Mhm.
Particularly since we just don't have stated end games and plans when we do this, right?
Right.
It's really. I mean, I'm almost speechless because we just keep on doing this to ourselves, and it's just insane.
Well, on the campaign trail, Donald Trump had a pretty powerful message where he was saying, I've never sent our troops into war. I'm going to stop these forever wars. And,
Mhm.
it seems like a lot of people took him seriously from the left, right, and center. Um, Now that he has gone back on that very powerful message, is there an opening for Democrats? And how so? What kind of united message does the party have to have?
Well, it turns out Donald Trump lies, and he
Mm,
lies a lot. And he tells people what they want to hear in front of them and at rallies, and he does something different, right? He's
mhm.
the guy that said he was going to bring peace through strength, that he was going to end the Russia-Ukraine war on day one, that he was going to bring peace and stability in the Middle East. And look, here we are. The war in Ukraine rages. Russia continues to make slow but steady progress. The NATO coalition has been fractured and people have lost confidence in the United States. We have pulled out largely of our influence in Africa,
Right.
by ending important aid programs that actually stabilize Africa and bring credibility and bring support for America. And then guess what? Russia and China are quickly moving in to fill the void. Oh, and we have active duty Marines patrolling the streets of Los Angeles. So welcome. And we have missiles now being launched at our bases in the Middle East. It just happened, in the last couple of hours. So welcome to the chaos and the dysfunction of the second Trump administration. I would like to say that I'm surprised, but I'm not. And the worst part about it is it's young men and women that are suffering the burden and the consequences of this incompetency in the lies and the distortions of this administration. Again, it comes back to Donald Trump's an elitist. Was raised in a wealthy family, was given all of his money, was sent to Ivy League colleges, the Ivy League colleges that I couldn't get into, by the way, when I was a young working class man growing up in the upper Midwest, working at Arby's and working in construction to pay my way through college. And it's once again the elites in Washington that are making decisions, and it's everybody else that has to go and carry it out.
Well, as you mentioned, that Trump isn't just taking military action overseas. He's sent in the National Guard and the Marines to put down protests against ICE in Los Angeles. And in many cases, these ICE agents are masked. They're not showing identification. They're literally ripping people out of their homes, out of their cars, off the street. I mean, these seem to me, as a non-lawyer, you are one, as extra legal tactics. I mean, what does this say about where the rule of law is at right now in this country?
Well, it's in a very precarious position. There's just no doubt about that, right? And again, I'm going to make it very clear that I'm about enforcing the law, and if there are violent criminals, we need to enforce those laws and take those people off the street, right? And I actually talk to nobody. There's nobody that says, oh, if you're a murderer or a rapist or a burglar or have committed a violent crime, that you shouldn't, be grabbed and given due process to make sure you are actually who they say you are, right? Because that's a foundational American principle that you get due process, so they actually prove that you are who they say you are and that you committed a crime. But you're given that due process, and then if you committed the crime, you're either locked up and sent away or you're deported. I'm good with that. But it's that lack of due process, it's that extrajudicial, as you point out, unmarked vehicles, people wearing civilian clothes and masks, yanking people off the street. This is un-American. This is as un-American as it gets. This is not the way that we run business in the United States of America, or the way that we should, right? And it worries me, and frankly, it should worry every American, regardless of your political affiliation, that you have a president who's trying to consolidate presidential power. Like, if you're a conservative, and I know many, I was raised in a conservative family, right? Most of my family are conservatives, or you're a states' rights person, you should be gravely concerned about this. Like, you have a president who's trying to basically consolidate enormous power, unbelievable amounts of power, with little oversight, with little constitutional checks in the executive branch, in the presidency. That is not a conservative value.
There is this conventional wisdom that Democrats should, stay away from talking about immigration issues because it's a very good issue for Donald Trump, even though his poll numbers have been falling on that and many issues. Do you think that is stopping many in your party from addressing, this overreach by the Trump administration because they are afraid of the political consequences?
I'm one of those Democrats that think it was a major mistake to not talk about this and take it head on. I think that was one of the biggest mistakes of the last election cycle, actually, that we ignored it, that we didn't take border security seriously, that we didn't approach it head on and admit where there were problems and to address those problems. Because when you do that, when you just ignore something and stick your head in the sand on a really important issue like border security, then what happens is it creates a void that allows somebody to fill that void with wild, immoral ideas, right? They then become the only idea and the only thing, right? And that's what we see happening, right? Massive overreach, massive overcorrection to the point of egregious abuses happening around the country, right? Because we didn't provide that viable alternative. Right now, we actually did have let me also be clear about this. We did have a bipartisan immigration bill that it was debated, which was settled on by the Senate. It didn't give everybody everything they wanted, which is what compromises are all about. And it was Donald Trump that tanked that deal. Right? So he tanked it because he would rather run on the crisis, which he did.
Right. But and President Biden said at the time he would have signed it.
Yeah. And I would have voted for it too. Right. And again, there were things in there that I didn't like. But listen, that's legislating, right? That's you don't always get everything you want, because if everybody gets everything that they want, then everyone digs in and nobody gets anything. That's just the way it works. I don't believe compromise is an ugly word. I just don't. Legislating requires it. So yeah, I think that's a long way of saying I think we haven't tackled it head on enough. We haven't talked about it enough. We shouldn't shy away from this, right? We have a badly broken immigration system. It's Congress that has to fix it, because it's the laws that are fundamentally creating the problems, right? There are push factors, there are pull factors, there are border security factors, there are visa factors. There's a whole variety of things that are at play that ultimately require Congress to take action to fix it.
And during the 2024 campaign, didn't Donald Trump spend a lot of time demagoguing a city in Colorado, Aurora, about immigration issues and violent gangs taking over and spreading misinformation? I seem to remember that there was a rally pretty late in the campaign where he was just putting up all these photos of violent criminals and saying this is the problem he was going to take care of. But now, of course, we're seeing all these images of, mothers being thrown to the ground, and people who have lived here for decades and do not have criminal records are being arrested.
Yeah.
What are you hearing from your constituents about this? Because you're correct. A lot of people would like to see changes in immigration.
Mhm.
They do think that the system is broken. But uh, these were not exactly the tactics that Trump was talking about on the campaign trail, are they?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you raising, my hometown of Aurora. It's my district that he demonized, that he lied about. He told massive lies about my hometown, Aurora. Basically said that the city has been taken over by these transnational gangs, which is not remotely true, right? So, one of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that I represent one of the most diverse districts in the nation. I represent a community of immigrants and refugees. Nearly 1 out of 5 of my constituents were born outside of the United States.
Mm.
I have over 130 languages spoken in my public school system throughout my district. And people in Aurora and people in Colorado know that our community is stronger, is more vibrant because of that immigrant refugee heritage, right? There are business owners. They work with us. Their kids go to school with us. Like, they are a part of the fabric of our community. And what we know is that these lies and these distortions were told for a reason by Donald Trump, right? Because what he wanted to do is he wanted to vilify and demonize all immigrants and all refugees and cast them all as criminals. Because his plan all along was to do mass deportation, that to go after women, children, and families. That was his plan. And that's what we see happening more and more, right? It was never just about enforcing the laws against violent criminals and getting violent criminals off our street. That was never his end game, right? It was to use that to then expand it in to this mass deportation, because that is Stephen Miller's ideology. Stephen Miller is running the show here.
Right.
He's
Trump's top advisor on immigration.
He's the wizard behind the curtain on all of this, right? This is his ideology. This is his plan. This is what he wants to do, and he's the driver behind it. And you listen to what he's said. You listen to what he's written. We don't have to read tea leaves here. He has said it. He just wants mass deportation, right? He doesn't believe in a nation of immigrants and refugees like we have been from our very beginning. It's a fundamentally different worldview, and that is the one that they're trying to implement.
Right. And you flipped your district back in 2018, correct?
I did. Yeah, I'm the first Democrat to ever hold my seat in Colorado's 6th district. So ever since its founding in the early 1980s, it's been in Republican hands, and I flipped it after a bruiser of a battle, and then I held it in my first reelect, and here I am.
And now your other job is recruiting other Democrats to run for Congress next year. And so, what we've seen is that Trump's poll numbers are slipping, but Democrats don't seem to be able to capitalize off of that. And I know that there have been a lot of stories about lagging fundraising. So, one thing that you have called for is for Democrats to stop engaging in culture wars and focus on what matters to everyday people. And so, I guess to start, what do you define as culture wars?
Well, there's a lot of different issues, and first of all, it's not. We don't talk about culture wars. Like, talk about what the Pentagon is doing, right? It's not the Democrats that are driving the culture war issues. Actually, it's Trump and MAGA that drive it, and then Democrats take the bait. That's our problem. We take the bait, and then we allow the debate and the narrative to be focused on that. I want to be very clear about this too. There are a lot of very morally virtuous, important issues worth talking about and fighting for. And I have spent my life fighting for disadvantaged, disenfranchised folks largely, and I will continue to do that. And I'm never going to shy away from a battle and a fight for somebody that needs a champion and needs a voice. Right? That is my job. But from an electoral standpoint, if we're going to actually start winning again in places where we have not won in a long time, that requires that we focus on issues of common good, right? By definition, if you're trying to build a coalition and pull people into that coalition that have different backgrounds, different ideas, different preferences, then the way to do that is you start by focusing on the issues that everybody's concerned about, right? Everybody needs and wants and deserves high quality, affordable healthcare. Everybody wants good infrastructure. Everybody wants good schools. Everybody wants clean air and clean water, right? Those are issues of common good that should be the focus of our efforts. And that's not at the exclusion of other issues, because we can fight those fights and stand up for people's rights and be fair and just be good to people. But it's where we choose to focus when we're out there talking to folks and trying to build that coalition. That is my point.
Right. So what's that balance between talking about things like, gas prices, which, I think we can safely assume are going to rise now, inflation, which has not gone down despite, that was another one of Trump's promises. What's the balance with talking about kind of those kitchen table issues and, important civil rights issues or reproductive health care? Because, those are important issues for people's, life, liberty, and happiness as well.
Yeah, I don't think we need to choose, right? This is about how you do it. And I'm out, you referenced Susan, I'm out talking to these candidates. This is why, being an elected official is not easy, right? Because I'm just going to say it, right? Like, you have to be able to do multiple things at the same time, right? You can't be like, oh, this year I'm just going to talk about the Constitution and due process, and then maybe next year I'm going to talk about infrastructure and the environment. No, right? We don't have the luxury of just backburnering really important issues to people, because if you do that, the world moves on anyhow, right? And the world does not stop spinning. So yes, the answer to the question is yes. You need to talk to people about infrastructure and healthcare and education, and you don't shy away from a battle on due process, because what happens is, and history shows this very, very clearly, if you stop talking about and fighting for constitutional rights and due process, you lose them.
Right.
They go away. You lose it.
Right.
Right. And I'm not willing to allow that to happen on my watch. Right. If they're sending people out in unmarked vans, wearing civilian clothes, masked men with guns, and they're not labeled what agency they're from, what they're doing, and they're snatching people off the street because they look different or they look suspicious, and then they're sending them to mega prisons at El Salvador or someplace else. That's a damn problem.
Right.
And everyone's like, well, they're just rounding up criminals. Like, okay, well, that's the point of due process. Is how do we know they're who they say they are? Right? How do they know you're the criminal? If you're just some guy hanging outside of a 7-Eleven and you look off, you look different, into the van you go. I mean, that's nuts. And I will pick that fight every day of the week and twice on Saturday.
To some degree, is it changing the way that Democrats talk about some of these issues instead of, like my U.S. Senator is Alyssa Slotkin, and she was part of that class of 2018, that national security group, that you're part of.
Yeah.
She's talked a lot about just kind of talking like normal people, not college professors, when you talk about some of these rights and, about threats to democracy. Is that part of the problem?
Yeah, authenticity matters a lot, right? Politicians, when a politician is like projecting a caricature of themselves or like projecting some image of themselves that's different from that they are, like you can tell, you can just, people's BS meter goes off, right? And you see this all the time when you get the elected official that shows up, with the brand new Carhartt jacket that they just bought,
Right.
at Bass Pro Shops, or the cowboy boots. They went to Yale Law School and were raised in a
Hmm.
wealthy family, and then they show
Are
up.
you perhaps talking about a certain governor from Florida, or?
I'm not naming names, Susan.
Okay.
I'm just saying
Okay.
you can. And then you show up with the boots and the Carhartt. I'm like, really? Because, I bet if you show me your hands, there are no freaking calluses on those hands,
Right.
right? I worked in construction growing up, and when you go on a construction site and show up and you shake someone's hand, you're feeling their hands, right? You want to know, is this a working person? Do they have calluses? Who are they? So
Right.
authenticity matters a lot. Just saying the thing, being honest, matters a lot, and people will really respond to that.
Mm-hmm. And one thing that, we tend to hear over and over again from our viewers is they just want Democrats to stand up and fight for them. And that seems to be, more than just specific issues. Just feeling like they're not alone and they have people who are in Washington who are pushing back against, some of these really draconian policies that the Trump administration is engaging in.
Yeah.
And so, do you see that being a key to the midterms, is making sure that the Democrats are fighting back and not just waiting for poll tested messages?
Absolutely. Strength matters and decisiveness matters, right? The ability to make a damn decision and then implement it and have the courage of your convictions matters a lot,
Mm-hmm.
right? And people want leadership, right? They want someone that is willing to stand by what they say, to follow through. But that goes hand in hand with humility too, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I learned when I was a combat leader, is you make mistakes, and you got to be willing to own up to them, to own them, and to fix them, right? Because if you don't own your mistakes, then they don't get fixed, and they happen again. And
Right.
you actually see this with the Trump administration right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Zero accountability, total impunity, right? With like
Mm-hmm.
Signalgate, for example. Like, how messed up was that?
Right, with the Secretary of
And they
Defense
never once,
messaging people who had nothing to do with
yeah,
national security about war plans.
that's right. And there was zero accountability, zero acknowledgement that there was a problem, total impunity, which tells me there were no lessons learned, no
Right.
change. Right? So, and that underscores a culture of impunity that
Mm-hmm.
allows other things to happen, that allows bad things to happen. And that's not the type of culture that I think anybody wants in any organization, whether it's a business or a church or a community or a government.
Right. So we have another example of history repeating itself, because Trump is doubling down on his 2017 tax cuts in his, big budget bill, making them bigger and better, for people like Elon Musk. But there are so many facets in this bill that, it's now before the Senate. My understanding is that the bill has gone through some changes and is even worse. Yes, there are all the healthcare cuts, enshrining Trump's executive power grab into law, but also possibly selling off millions upon millions of acres of public land.
Yeah.
So, I know that this has been overshadowed by what's going on in Iran, what's going on in the streets of LA, but, this is still the biggest, game in town in Washington. What do people have to know about where we're at in the process and what's in this bill?
Yeah. Well, I've been doing this Congress gig for 6.5 years now, and I voted on some really bad stuff, some really bad bills. And I can say without a doubt, this is the worst bill that I voted on in my time. Right? This is the single largest transfer of wealth from the middle class to the top 1% in probably my lifetime. It's, as you point out, selling off millions of acres of public land. Right? I live in the West. I'm a Westerner. In public lands cut across party lines, whether you're a hunter or fisherman or a hiker or an off-roader, there is this legacy that we inherited these public lands, and that we have an obligation to preserve them and protect them and give them to the next generation. And this administration is about to sell off vast portions of our public lands to pay
And
for help pay for a tax break for billionaires and large corporations. That's atrocious, right?
right.
On top of it, the millions, 13 plus million people that could lose their health care. And, there's a lot of people that might be sitting back and saying, well, why? I'm not on Medicare or
Hmm.
Medicaid. Why should I care? Well, because even if you're not on Medicaid, what happens if tens of thousands in your people in your community lose health care? They can't work. They can't contribute to the economy. They get sick. That impacts everybody. Plus, this takes about $1 trillion out of the healthcare system.
Hmm.
So you think it's hard to get an appointment with a healthcare provider now? Just you wait when all these rural hospitals close, when clinics close, when the system is far more overburdened than it is now. It is going to be a disaster for everybody, regardless of who's paying for your healthcare.
Right. I mean, I'm sure that there are a lot of rural areas in Colorado. I mean, I've spent a lot of time hiking through them, so I'm aware. And I've got to think that, this bill is just, completely devastating for those areas because, you'll see hospital closures. A lot of their economies are totally dependent on public lands and tourism coming through,
Yeah.
for restaurants and, hotels and on and on. So that's a huge economic hit. There are disproportionate rates of people who get food stamps, that could be cut. There are Medicare cuts on the table. So, I mean, and a lot of these areas are very strongly, MAGA. So
Yeah.
it seems like it hurts Trump's voters most of all. So that seems to be a very curious calculation.
Yeah, it makes no sense. And you're absolutely right. The rural America is going to be hit the hardest, right? It's the rural hospitals that are going to be at risk of closing, many of them. It's the public lands in rural areas that will be sold off. Excellent point when you talk about the economic driver to those communities that rely on those public lands and the outdoorsmen and women that use them. It's the food assistance. It's the cuts to diabetes and other care, right? The Inflation Reduction Act that we passed under Democratic control a couple of Congresses ago and signed into law by President Biden fixed the cost of insulin to $35 a month, right? It used
Right.
to be hundreds. I can't tell you how many constituents would pay $300 or $400 a month to pay for their insulin. Now it's $35 a month, right?
Right.
All of these things that will get rolled back and are going to have devastating consequences on people's pocketbook, their ability to survive, their ability to pay for medication, their local economies, their ability to actually access healthcare, to go to a local clinic or a hospital. If they cut all the education funding that they're looking at cutting, immediately is going to go to some of the most rural and working class communities that will suffer the biggest burden.
Right. Well, we've heard some criticism from Republican senators about the bill. Do you feel like it's still in play, that there might be enough votes to actually defeat it?
Yeah, I've learned to never underestimate the ability of Donald Trump just to browbeat Republicans into submission, which is really, I mean, it's really been sad to see people losing their independence. I think one of
Mhm.
the amazing things about Congress historically is that we are supposed to be independent. We are supposed to actually be the first branch of government. There's a reason why Article 1 of the Constitution is Congress and Article
Right.
2 is the presidency, right? The framers put us as the Article 1 branch because that's where the most power should reside. And even though they're co-equal branches, that power is supposed to emanate from the people, right? And there's nobody closer to the people and more accountable to the people than members of Congress, because it's every day that we're hearing from them, that we're talking to them. We go home, every week to hold town halls and high school gymnasiums, or at
Well,
least we should.
some members
I'm
are.
gonna say at least we should to go to the Friday night fish fries, to show up to the Kiwanis clubs and the Rotaries and to take questions. I mean, it's the stuff I do all the time, and I stand in front of people, right? And I guess to bring this full circle, talking about Iran and war powers,
Hmm.
if I'm going to take a vote, and why this is so important that Congress is the body that authorizes military force, I should have to take a vote to an up or down on that. And then I go home and I stand in front of those men and women and those mothers and fathers that have to pay for it, that to send their sons and daughters off to do it, that have to be bearing the brunt of that decision. I have to be facing those folks all the time. And
Do
that's
you
the way it's supposed to be.
do you see a scenario under this current Congress where leaders will reassert their power under Article 1, or is this something that will only change with the next election potentially?
Well, probably the latter,
Mm.
right? Probably. Um, I don't know. I'm an optimist by nature. I wouldn't be doing this job if I weren't, right? If I just thought I don't need the title, right? I don't need. I've got young kids. I don't need to be a member of Congress. I'm doing this because I still believe in it, because I love the work. I love service. I love this country. I'm a patriotic person, and for all of the failings that we've had and us not living up to our promises in so many ways throughout history, I still believe in the greatness and the promise of America. And I think people always have the ability to make a different decision and do the right thing.
Well, I appreciate ending this on a note of optimism, which is a challenge to do these days. Um, let's hope that we have more reasons to be optimistic with the situation in the Middle East. But Congressman, I so appreciate you taking time, especially on a busy day like today. And I really hope that you'll come back so that we can continue this discussion on so many of these issues.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Would love to come back, and let's just give our prayers and thoughts out to those troops and their families right now who are under assault in the Middle East, and hopefully they are safe. Thank you.
Thank you so much.